We have been blessed with another privilege to come out and assemble together and worship God. I pray, as Tom said in his closing prayer, that everything I say will be pleasing and acceptable in God's sight. You can probably guess from the screen, we're going to be talking about what could be a controversial subject in some instances, and that is money. And mainly our relationship to money, our attitudes towards it, and God. And what does it mean? Now, in this country, we have made a mess with money. We have placed it in a position that has caused much trouble. There's many people who romanticize the socialist ideas that just whatever is someone else's should be theirs just because they want it and they need it. And some have gone as far as to say that a true Christian would be a socialist because of taking some of the things that's said in Acts about them giving to one another and having all things in common and some of those things and selling their goods to help others. Well, that just means that we're everybody's to be equal financially. And not that this is a lesson on socialism, but that mentality is destined to fail. You can't find one area where that works truly. Now, we do have some things in our country, like, say, our first responders and the things that our government does for all of us, that it would be socialist in its nature, but we're digressing a little bit there. But when you look at what a Christian's responsibility and attitude towards our money is, well, my iPad just turned off again. Did that to me last Sunday at this time. When we look at what the Christians say and are to believe about that, we need to go back and look at what the scriptures say. And while our opinions may be varied, there's only one source that we can go to, and that is the Bible. And it's not silent on the subject of our money and our finances and what we're to do with them. Did you know, as I was working on this lesson, I did some searching, and money or finances is the number one cited reason for divorce in our country. Either differences in money management or because of serious financial trouble that brings extra hardship to the marriage, or what some call financial infidelity, where one partner has lied about something and hidden something from the other partner. The number one reason for divorce is money. The average American household, and this was interesting, depending on how you look at it, on what survey you look at, it's estimated that the average American household is between $10,000 and $12,000 in credit card debt alone. That's just consumer debt, things that we bought, and you really don't have anything to show for that. $12,000. And age plays a big factor in that. My generation is actually the largest in debt of all the generations. Nationwide, the total consumer debt stands at $18.8 trillion. I mean, that's staggering. There are many people upset because Elon Musk became the first billionaire or trillionaire recently. Well, we're going in the wrong direction when we're in debt. $18.8 trillion. And the revolving credit loan in the United States for consumers is $1.25 trillion. That's just an insane amount of number. The zeros would go from here out the back door in $1 trillion. And to think that that's because we're not using our finances properly. It's dangerous. We all know about the home foreclosure issue that was going on a few years ago, and it caused the housing market to crash and caused a lot of other problems with that. It was in the news everywhere, and politicians none of them fixed it, but they all had ideas of what they could do. But it all started with greed and the wrong views and wrong attitudes towards money. Now, I'm not trying to be Dave Ramsey or Susie Orman or any of those financial geniuses here, but when it comes to being a Christian and my finances and my money, I have some responsibilities and some attitudes that we should have. First off, 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 10, Paul tells us that the root, the love of money is the root of all evil. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and in verse 10, for the love of money is the root of all evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. So, of course, we have to have it. We can't survive without it. We're told to work to earn money so that we can provide for our families. So it's something that we all need. But Paul warns us here that loving it is the root of everything that is evil, because look at all the problems that stem from it. And some, sadly, have lost their faith and turned away from their faith because of it. And it's brought on many sorrows because they're chasing something that is unattainable. But I want us to look in Matthew chapter 25. Today's where Matthew 25 is where most of our thoughts today will come from. Because in Matthew chapter 25, in this parable that the Lord is giving here, and we often use Matthew 25 to talk about, because the word talents is there, we often use that to talk about our abilities. And that is a very good comparison to use that, a good parallel to draw. But from that passage, I want us today to take a look at Matthew chapter 25 using the word talents for what it really is, and that is a sum of money. It was a coin or a sum of money. And that's what the Lord is talking about here. That's the literal use, the literal meaning of that. It's money. And with that, we should be able to see what our attitude should be and what the Lord's attitude is towards us and our possessions. And there's really, to start with, the first thing that we have to realize is that all that we have comes from God. Matthew chapter 25 and verse 14. God is represented as the man that is traveling, and that he is giving this to his servants to take care of. All that we have in this life, that, quote, we could say belongs to us, doesn't really belong to us. It was given to us by God. Matthew chapter 25 and verse 14 tells us that God distributed to his servants, and he entrusted them with his goods. What they had belonged to him. Everything in this world is God's. In Psalms chapter 24 and in verse 1 beginning, Psalms chapter 24 and in verse 1, the earth is the Lord's in all its fullness, the world and those who dwell therein. Everything in it is God's. He is the creator and he is the governor of it. It is his property. Now, men may claim districts and kingdoms and areas as their property. We own a little parcel of land inside the city. That's my property, isn't it? No, it all belongs to God. God is the Lord of all things. He created everything, including all creatures and human beings that inhabit the earth. It is his. We were able to get out yesterday and enjoy some time in nature on the water in our kayaks. And it was so pretty and it was so peaceful when we weren't around anybody. And I said, can't we just find a place where there's no people? But to get out there where it's silent and all you can hear are the birds chirping and the wind blowing through the trees and nature, that all belongs to God. It is his. But we are also his. Romans chapter 14 and verse 8 tells us that we belong to the Lord. I'm not even my owner of myself. I belong to God. Romans chapter 14 and verse 8. For if we live to the Lord. And if we die to the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. I don't believe that most of us, or most people in general, like to think this way most of the time. I think we want to be our own person. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to do what pleases me. But that's not really the case, is it? My soul belongs to God. He's the one who gave it. We're told that in the Old Testament, that when we die, the body goes back to the ground where it came from, and the soul goes back to God who gave it. That's who the soul belongs to. But again, all nature, everything, everywhere we look back in the book of Psalms, chapter 50, and in verse 10, all the world, including all that we see in nature, truly belongs to God. Psalms 50 here is talking about God's might and his power over everything. Beginning in verse 10, it says, "For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the mountains, and the wild beasts of the field are mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world is mine, and all its fullness." All the beasts that roam in the wild, that can't be tamed or controlled in any way by man, and there are many of them that can't. All of those are under God's control and his power. Everything that we look at belongs to God, including what we have in our bank accounts. The children of Israel were reminded of all that they owed God and all that he had done for them back in Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 11 beginning. Look at what God has done for you, as they were looking back on that. Not what all I've earned or what all I've done. And that's the attitude that many have towards their possessions. Look at what I have accomplished. Well, back here in Deuteronomy, they were reminded, you have this because of God. Deuteronomy 8, beginning in verse 11, "Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments, his judgments, and his statutes, which I commanded you today, lest when you have eaten and are full, and have built beautiful houses and dwell in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and your gold are multiplied, and all that you have are multiplied, when your heart is lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, who led you through that great and terrible wilderness in which were fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty land where there was no water, who brought water for you out of the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and that he might test you to do good in the end. Then you will say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gained me this wealth. And you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers as it is this day. You know, we like to think like the children of Israel. We have earned all this. We have done this. And as he's reminding them, when the good times are here, when everything is prospering, this is when you start forgetting this. And that's true today, that many times when things are going well, we don't stop and think about our soul. We don't stop and think about anything but ourselves. When things are going downhill for us, that's when we get a little bit of introspection and we start looking for God and looking for a higher power. But when we're riding high and when everything's going perfectly, we don't think to look at where all of that good came from. And that's what he's reminding them. Remember God. You were in this position, and now you're in a place that's better, and it's going to continue to improve and get better and better for you. That's when you're going to forget. Don't forget that everything you have is because God gave you the ability to do it. And that's why that we owe God everything, just like the children of Israel did, because as they were brought out of the bondage of Egypt, we were brought and bought, we were redeemed out of the bondage of sin. In 1 Peter chapter 1 and beginning in verse 18, what could we give? What would we have that could possibly equal the value of the blood of Christ? We were partaking in the Lord's Supper this morning. I was thinking about that. What could I give? And we get, as we were talking about anger in our Bible study, we get awful high on ourselves, don't we? As to what I'm able to do or what I should do or how people should be treating and responding to me. Well, we should reverse that thought. We're looking to God and all that he has done for us. What could I do to repay that? I can't do anything to repay that. That's because we owe him everything. Just like those that were freed from the bondage of the Egyptians, what could they do to repay that? Well, nothing, except to remember where it came from. 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 18, knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold from your aimless conduct received by tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ as a lamb without blemish and without spot. We may, on this earth, we may buy or trade something from a material possession, and we think, well, I got a good deal on that, or I made a fair deal on that. And everything that we look at has a price, a value next to it. If you go to a bank and you want to get a loan, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to look at one of the blue books and see what the value of that is. They're not going to loan you $1 million for a $200,000 house, because the value of that asset does not equal the value of that loan. And the same with a car. You can go upside down a little bit, but there's going to come a point where you can't finance anymore because of what that car is worth if they have to repossess it. Well, what's the value of my soul? Well, what is it worth? I'm told what it was bought with, and it was bought with something worth more than any material possession that we could ever accumulate, because it was paid for with the precious blood of Jesus. Nothing on this earth is equal to that value. Not even if we combined every single piece of it from the beginning of time until the world comes to an end. It would not equal that not one drop of that blood that was shed for us. So all that we have, we owe to God because of what he gave for us. Also, from Matthew chapter 25 and concerning with our money and with what God has, we see that in verse 15 that God is a good and a wise owner of what he has. And he gave to his servants according to their ability. Matthew chapter 25 and beginning in verse 15. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each one according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. Now, if we think about this, and then we think about this in line with the socialist mentality where it's all even, well, if we look at how God gave there, he didn't divide those 5, 7, 8 talents by 3, did he? He gave them according to their ability, to what they could handle. There's some Proverbs where you read and it talks about when you get wealth in haste, that it causes problems because you don't know how to handle it. And it's the same here. God knew the ability of his servants. And he knew what they were capable of handling, just as he knows what I am capable of handling. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and beginning in verse 11. God is going to take care of me. And he will help us in our time of trouble and trials and temptations. He will also help us during the good times as well. And sometimes those finances can cause some of those trials and temptations as well. Beginning in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13. Now, all these things happened to them as an example. That's talking about the children of Israel, and they were written for our admonition, which are upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man, but God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it. Now, if we look at verse 12 and we think about it in terms of our finances, and think about that combined with 1 Timothy chapter 6, let him who thinks he stands. Oh, how secure we feel when we have a lot of money at our resources. And I was reading something in some financial literature the other day, and it was talking about how that a person, sometimes there are people who make 200,000 that live more paycheck to paycheck than someone that makes 75. And the reason for that is they have a certain lifestyle that they have to live up to. And they're spending that money to maintain that lifestyle. The person that's only making the 75,000 in wealth, well, they're saving and investing wisely. That's how they can do that. They're capable and good owners and managers of that. And you know that having a lot of money can cause more problems, different problems, if we don't handle it properly. Think of all the young, stupid people that the internet has made famous and all the money that they have had. Most of them cannot handle having that kind of wealth and the freedom it brings because they make dumb choices with it. Look at the number of former professional athletes who had no money to begin with, and then somebody handed them a large sum of money to play whatever sport it is that they're good at. And they retire, and they should retire in a position of financial security, but they retire broke because they spent it all. They did not handle that properly. Well, God knows what we're capable of handling, and He is going to help us through that if we just look to Him. We also see from Matthew chapter 7, beginning in verse 7, that God is a generous owner for what He has. In Matthew chapter 25, when He left, He didn't have to give those servants anything, did He? But He did. He entrusted them with His goods. Well, Matthew chapter 7 tells us that God knows how to give us what we need, how to give good. And if we know how to do that from an earthly standpoint, as Jesus says here, if your son asks for bread, you're not going to give him a snake or something that's going to harm him. You're going to do something for his good. And if we know how to do that from a physical, earthly standpoint as mere humans, think how much more God can give us. Matthew chapter 7 and beginning in verse 7, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find, knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. Or what man is there among you who, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will he give him a serpent? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask Him? Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Look at you from your standpoint. You're not going to give something to your children that's going to hurt them, that's going to cause them harm. You're going to give them what they need. Well, think about God and what all He can give to us and what all He has given to us. It may not be what we want or what we think we want, but it would be what we need. If we turn over to Psalms chapter 37 and verse 25, this verse should give us great encouragement as a Christian. Are we going to be eating, well, it would probably kill us if we did, but are we going to be eating steak every single night or some lavish meal? Not necessarily, but we are going to have our needs met. Psalms chapter 37 and verse 25, I have been young and now am old, yet have I not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his descendants begging bread. We won't be without because of our family of Christians. That if we are in a place of trouble, we should be there to help one another. So we're not begging bread or in need. And David's saying, I've lived a long life and I've been in many situations, but the children of God, his descendants, are going to have their needs met. So as we look at our attitudes towards what's mine, it shouldn't be to satisfy all of my wants and desires. It should be to meet my daily needs. And instead of the mine mentality when it comes to our possessions, we need to realize that as Christians, we are just mere stewards of what we have. And a steward is a manager of something that belongs to someone else. What I have isn't really mine, it belongs to someone else, and I'm just taking care of it for them. It means a trustee, a manager, an overseer, one who controls, occupies, supervises, seeks to advance or multiply that which belongs to another. And in this case, it's the material things that God has blessed us with. And we see that expressed in Matthew chapter 25 and in verses 16 and 17. And that's why when the 5 and the 2 talent man comes back, that's the very definition of that. I took what was yours and I took such good care of it, I doubled it. Its worth and value has increased because I managed it well. Beginning in verse 16, then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. And likewise, he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. Now here's where some of the problem with this would come in. Many believe it's wrong to invest or to use the Lord's money or what we have been blessed with for gain. Well, here, this is exactly what they did. And we're going to find later that the 1 talent man is rebuked for not doing that. But every Christian, every single one of us are stewards. In 1 Peter chapter 4 and beginning in verse 7, and notice as we read this verse 10, we were appointed by God to use what he has blessed us with for the benefit of others. 1 Peter chapter 4 and beginning in verse 7, but the end of all things is at hand. Therefore be serious and watchful in your prayers. And above all things, we have fervent love for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without grumbling, and as each one has received his gift, minister it to one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. If anyone speaks, let him speak as the oracles of God. If anyone ministers, let him do it as with the ability which God supplies, that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom belong the glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. Look at yourselves as a good steward, or as a steward of God. That's our appointment. We've been given him this work to do. And we have been entrusted by him with whatever he has blessed us with, and entrusted by him to use it properly. Nothing we have is our own, including ourselves. And this is where we'll end this morning. But even my physical body, as we talked about, the soul belongs to God. Well, the soul is housed in this physical body while we're on this earth, and it is not my own either. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and beginning in verse 19, our bodies are to be cared for and used by God. And as we look at the thoughts behind this lesson with our finances, well, part of that is how do we take care of our bodies? 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 19, or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own, for you were bought at a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. And again, there is that point of you've been bought. You have been paid for. under the old law, the temple was the place where they went to worship God, where the sacrifices were made, where any relationship that they had with him was conducted through that temple. Well, under the new dispensation, the New Testament, that separation was broken down, and he's within each of us. We all have that, or can have that relationship with him under this new, more spiritual law. We are the temples. Our bodies are where the sacrifices are made. We're not our own because God paid for it. And that's how we're to worship him and use that properly as the good steward that we should be over what we have. So this lesson isn't necessarily geared just towards our money, but towards everything that we have. And we'll pick up with this thought this evening and a few more thoughts. I didn't even bring in, through this lesson, didn't even bring in the rich farmer. When we think about him and the life that he had and the reverse of being a good steward of it, because he took it and heaped it all upon himself and completely left God out of it and completely left others out. It was all about what he had done. If we want to look at the reverse of that, then he would be the perfect example of how not to be, because it was all what he had done. And just like God reminded the children of Israel there, when things are going good, remember, don't forget where it came from. Well, the rich farmer had forgotten all that. Look at what I've done. Look at this ground that I had, the crops that I grew. Well, he didn't do anything. He didn't provide the rain that watered them. He didn't make the soil that they were growing in. He didn't provide the sun that gave them life. None of that was from him, was it? It was all from God. And he forgot that. So as we think about what we have and what we have been blessed with, we need to remember where that came from, including our soul and the freedom that we have being bought out of sin. The freedom that was paid for through the blood of Christ, to be free from the bondage, the heavy bondage of sin. And if we're to be pleasing in God's sight, then we have to obey him. And if we're subject to the Lord's invitation in any way, let's take this time to think about the condition of our soul, and let's make corrections in our life before it's too late while we stand and sing.